Have you ever noticed the shift that happens in someone when they find out their relatives are coming to visit? The energy changes, the shoulders tense, there's a heaviness that settles in, even before anyone arrives. And if you look carefully, you might see someone who is just fine suddenly finding reasons to retreat to their room, to their headphones, to anywhere but the space where those relatives will gather. We live in a culture that tells us family visits should be joyful. We're taught from childhood that relatives are a blessing, that time together is precious, that not wanting to participate in these gatherings is somehow ungrateful or strange. But the truth is far more complex. There are millions of people who experience genuine dread when family obligations loom. And this dread is not a character flaw. It's not rudeness. It's not something they should be ashamed of. It's psychology. It's the result of complex emotional patterns, social anxiety, unresolved dynamics, and sometimes simply the mismatch between who we are and who we're expected to be in the presence of family. When relatives visit, something happens that doesn't happen in other social situations. The stakes feel higher, the judgment feels sharper, the need to perform feels more exhausting, because relatives are the people who have known us the longest, who remember us at our worst, who have opinions about who we should be and how we should act. And for many people, that weight is unbearable. Let's start with the most obvious reason. Many people grew up in environments where family gatherings were not safe spaces. Maybe there was criticism disguised as concern. Maybe there was comparison, the constant measuring of your achievements against your siblings or cousins. Maybe there was invasion of privacy, questions about your choices that felt intrusive and judgmental. Or maybe there was something more serious, conflict or tension that made every gathering feel like navigating a minefield. These experiences become embedded in our nervous system. Your body learns to associate relatives with stress. And when stress becomes associated with a particular context, avoidance becomes the natural response. It's not weakness, it's your brain trying to protect you. There's also something we might call relational exhaustion. Most people can perform socially for a certain amount of time. We can put on the social mask, engage in small talk, laugh at jokes, maintain the image of the person we're supposed to be. But the closer someone is to us, the more history we have with them, the harder that performance becomes. With relatives, especially those you've lived with or spent significant time around, you can't hide as easily. They notice the shifts in your mood, they remember your past, they ask deeper questions. And that depth, that history, while it can be beautiful, can also feel suffocating. It requires constant vigilance. It requires emotional labor that not everyone has the capacity for. Psychologists refer to something called social exhaustion, and it's real. It's not introversion, though introverts experience it intensely. It's not shyness, though shy people might struggle with it. It's the depletion that comes from managing your social presentation. And when that performance happens in front of people who know your actual self, the gap between the two can feel impossibly wide. The effort required to bridge that gap, to keep showing up as expected, can be absolutely draining. There's also the matter of expectations. When relatives visit, there are unspoken rules about how much of your time and attention they deserve. You're supposed to be available. You're supposed to be excited. You're supposed to want to spend every moment with them. But what if you don't? What if you have your own life, your own interests, your own need for solitude? The guilt that follows this feeling can be paralyzing. You feel like you should want to be there. You feel selfish for not feeling that way. And so you withdraw, not just physically but emotionally, creating a space between yourself and what's expected of you. This guilt is not productive. In fact, it often makes the situation worse, because you're now feeling bad about not wanting to be there, and that feeling seeps into every interaction. You become even more withdrawn. And then people notice, and they might ask why you're being quiet or distant. And now you have to either lie or defend yourself. Either way, you're trapped in a cycle of inauthenticity. Let's talk about identity and roles. In families, we often get assigned a role. The responsible one, the funny one, the rebel, the golden child, the scapegoat. These roles form early, and they're incredibly sticky. When relatives visit, they expect you to be that role. They want to see the person they've always known, not the person you've become or are becoming. And sometimes, especially for people who have changed, who have grown, who have moved away from the identity their family gave them, this expectation feels like erasure. You feel like you're being asked to step back into a smaller version of yourself. You feel diminished, and so you withdraw. You avoid the gathering because being there means being trapped in a role that no longer fits. There's also something called social comparison bias, and it runs particularly deep in family dynamics. When relatives visit, especially extended family, there's often an undercurrent of comparison. Who's doing better? Who's more successful? Who made the right choices? Whose life is more enviable? For people who are struggling, who feel like they're not where they're supposed to be, or who simply don't measure up in the way their family values, these gatherings can feel like public examinations. And the shame that comes with that is real. It's easier to avoid the gathering entirely than to face that shame. There's also the question of boundaries and autonomy. Some families respect boundaries naturally, others do not. They might comment on your appearance or your habits or your partner, For people who have fought hard to establish their independence and their sense of self, these intrusions can feel deeply violating, and so they build walls, they find reasons not to be there, because sometimes protecting your sense of self requires distance. This isn't malicious, it's survival. Now let's consider the phenomenon of masking. Many people, especially those who are neurodivergent or socially anxious, have learned to mask in social situations. Masking is the practice of suppressing your natural traits and behaviors to conform to social expectations. In family situations, masking can be particularly intense because the expectations are so specific and ingrained. You might need to mask your personality, your interests, your sense of humor, your way of communicating. For some people, masking is so exhausting that the thought of doing it in front of relatives makes them want to disappear. The energy cost is too high, and no amount of guilt can make it seem worthwhile. There's also something called the phenomenon of triggered emotional states. Family gatherings can trigger old wounds and old patterns. A comment that seems innocent to one person might hit a nerve in another because it connects to years of subtle criticism or favoritism. A joke that gets made might echo old dynamics of being laughed at rather than laughed with. And suddenly, all the old feelings surface, the resentment, the hurt, the anger that you thought you'd processed. And so you withdraw. You go to your room. You stay on your phone. You create distance because being present means being vulnerable to these triggered states. And you don't have the emotional capacity to feel all of that while also maintaining the social performance. There's also the impact of introversion, which deserves its own conversation. Introverts recharge through solitude. Social interaction, even with people they love, costs them energy. So when relatives visit and the expectation is constant presence and engagement, introverts are running a deficit. They're depleting their energy reserves just by showing up. And many introverts have learned that if they don't protect their solitude, if they don't create space to recharge, they become irritable, anxious, and depressed. So what looks like antisocial behavior is actually self-preservation. It's maintaining their mental health. It's not about not loving their relatives. It's about honoring their own needs. We live in an extrovert-biased culture that often pathologizes introversion as something that needs to be fixed. But it doesn't. It just needs to be understood and respected. Let's also consider attachment styles and their role in this dynamic. People with anxious attachment often struggle with family gatherings because they're hyper-aware of any rejection or criticism. They monitor other people's reactions carefully and often misinterpret neutral comments as attacks. This hypervigilance is exhausting. People with avoidant attachment might withdraw from family gatherings because emotional closeness feels threatening. They need distance to feel safe. People with disorganized attachment might feel torn between wanting connection and fearing it, which can result in confusing or contradictory behavior during family visits. None of these attachment patterns are character flaws. They're survival strategies that developed in response to early relational experiences. And they all contribute to the struggle some people have with family gatherings. There's also the impact of social anxiety specifically. Social anxiety is not just shyness. It's the fear that you will be judged or evaluated negatively by others. It's the belief that something embarrassing will happen and everyone will see it. In family gatherings where people know your history, this anxiety can be particularly acute. You feel like they're not just looking at who you are now, they're looking at all the mistakes you've made, all the awkward moments, all the ways you've failed, and one misstep, one weird comment, and suddenly you're confirming all their worst opinions of you. So you avoid. You stay quiet. You minimize your presence. Because the safest way to not be judged is to not be visible. Another important factor is unmet expectations within the family system. Maybe you wanted a parent or sibling to show up for you in a certain way and they never did. Maybe you hoped for reconciliation or acknowledgement and never got it. These unmet expectations create a kind of emotional distance that makes family gatherings feel hollow and painful. You're surrounded by people who should know you but don't. You're in a room with people who you hoped would be different and they're not. And that disappointment, that grief over the family you wanted but didn't get, can make it nearly impossible to engage authentically. It's easier to withdraw, it's easier to not try, it's easier to minimize the hurt by minimizing the connection. Let's talk about the impact of past conflicts and unresolved issues. In many families, there are elephants in the room, old arguments that were never fully resolved, betrayals that were never addressed, injuries that were never acknowledged. These unresolved issues create tension that everyone can feel but no one talks about. And for sensitive people, for people who absorb emotional atmosphere easily, being in that space is unbearable. It's like sitting in a room full of invisible thorns. You feel the pain, but you can't point to where it's coming from. So you remove yourself. You escape. You find reasons not to be there. And sometimes, that's the wisest thing you can do. There's also the matter of lifestyle differences and value clashes. As people grow up and move away, they often develop values and lifestyles that differ significantly from their family of origin. Some families can accept this gracefully, others cannot. If you've chosen a different religion, a different political worldview, a different way of living, and your family sees this as a rejection of them or their beliefs, family gatherings become ideological battlegrounds. And no one wants to spend their time in a war zone. Withdrawal becomes a form of self-protection and also a statement. It says, I'm not going to fight about this. I'm not going to defend my choices. I'm just going to remove myself from the situation. Let's consider also the role of personality differences. Some personalities are naturally more socially outgoing. Others are naturally more reserved. When a reserved person comes from a family of extroverts or vice versa, there can be a fundamental mismatch that no amount of effort can bridge. The extroverted family might see the reserved person as cold or unfriendly. The reserved person might feel overwhelmed and judged by the constant energy and noise. Family gatherings amplify these differences, and for the person whose personality doesn't match their family's expectations, it can feel impossible to just be themselves. So they retreat. They create distance. They find solace in solitude rather than in the chaos of family interaction. There's also the phenomenon of compassion fatigue in family systems. If you've taken on an emotional caretaking role in your family, if you're the one who listens to everyone's problems, who offers support, who tries to keep the peace, family gatherings can feel incredibly draining. You're not there as a person, you're there as a function, and you don't have anything left to give. So you avoid, you protect yourself by not being present, because being present means being drained, and you don't have the reserves to do that anymore. Let's also address the impact of perfectionism. Many people who avoid family gatherings have internalized perfectionism. They feel like they need to be a certain way, to have accomplished certain things, to have their life together in a certain way before they can face their relatives. And since perfection is impossible, they avoid indefinitely. They tell themselves they'll see relatives once they've lost weight, or gotten a better job, or found a partner, or achieved some other milestone. But the standard keeps moving. The goalposts keep shifting, and so they remain isolated, not because they don't love their family, but because they can't face the gap between who they are and who they feel they should be. Now let's talk about the nervous system and how it responds to stress. When you anticipate a family gathering, if you have past trauma or negative associations with family, your nervous system goes into a state of alert. Your body might tense up, your breathing might become shallow, your stress hormones might spike. This is not a conscious choice, it's an automatic response. Your nervous system is trying to protect you from perceived threat, and the only way to calm that down, the only way to feel safe again, is to withdraw, to create distance, to remove yourself from the situation. This is why talking someone into attending a family gathering often doesn't work. You can't logic someone out of a nervous system response. You have to address the root cause. You have to heal the wounds that created the response in the first place. There's also something called emotional flashbacks. If you experience something painful in the family system, being back in that environment, even years later, can trigger a flashback to that pain. You might suddenly feel like the child you were when that thing happened. You might feel the same helplessness and fear. And your instinct is to escape, to protect that young part of you from more harm. This isn't avoidance in the way that people usually think of it. It's trauma response. It's your system trying to keep you safe. We also need to talk about the role of social media and comparison culture in amplifying the stress around family gatherings. People now feel pressure not just to attend family gatherings, but to present them a certain way on social media, to take photos, to make it look fun and joyful and like everyone loves each other. And the pressure to perform that narrative, especially when the reality is painful or complicated, can be overwhelming. It's not enough to just endure the gathering. You also have to make it look good for an audience. That's an additional layer of exhaustion. Let's talk about what happens when someone finally does isolate themselves from their family. At first, it might feel like relief. The pressure is off, the expectation is gone. But over time, there can be guilt, shame, and loneliness. Not everyone wants to cut contact with their family. Some people would like to have a relationship, but they don't know how to manage the dynamics. They don't know how to set boundaries in a way that allows connection without pain. So they default to distance. And that distance, while protective, can also become its own kind of isolation. There's also the issue of how outsiders view someone who doesn't want to spend time with family. There's a cultural narrative that says you should love your family no matter what, that blood is thicker than water, that family is always a priority. People who don't follow this script are often judged harshly. They're seen as selfish or cold or unfeeling. But this judgment misses the complexity. It misses the pain. It misses the fact that sometimes protecting yourself means distancing yourself from the people who hurt you. And sometimes that's not selfish. That's self-love. Now let's talk about what healing and change might look like. For some people, avoiding family gatherings is a necessary boundary. It's the right choice for their mental health and well-being. But for others, there's a desire to have a different relationship with family, and they don't know how to build that. The path forward often involves several things. First, it involves understanding the specific reasons for the avoidance. What exactly triggers the withdrawal? Is it specific people, specific topics, specific roles you're asked to play? The more specific you can be about the trigger, the more you can address it. Second, it involves healing from past wounds. This is often where therapy comes in. Working with a therapist to process old hurts, to understand attachment patterns, to build a more resilient sense of self. Third, it involves practicing assertiveness and boundary setting, learning to say no in a way that feels safe, learning to express your needs, learning that you don't have to perform or participate in ways that deplete you. Fourth, it involves gradual exposure. If you want to reconnect with family, it might help to start small. Maybe attend for a shorter period of time. Maybe attend with a trusted support person. Maybe attend events that feel less charged. Building confidence through small successes. Fifth, it involves finding your own authentic way of relating. Not the role your family assigned you, but who you actually are and how you actually want to show up. This might look completely different from what your family expects, and that's okay. The goal isn't to make everyone happy. The goal is to create a way of being that feels true to you. Now, let's address some of the guilt that comes with this process. It's normal to feel guilty about not wanting to spend time with family. You might feel like you're being ungrateful or difficult or selfish. But here's the truth. Your needs are not selfish. Your well-being is not selfish. Your desire to protect your mental health is not selfish. Guilt is an appropriate response if you've done something wrong, but wanting to take care of yourself is not wrong. There's also the possibility of repair and reconnection. If you've distanced yourself from family, it doesn't have to be permanent. People can change. Dynamics can shift. With time, with intention, with boundaries in place, sometimes a different kind of relationship becomes possible. Not the relationship you wanted when you were younger, maybe, but a relationship that works for who you are now. That possibility is worth holding space for. So the next time you notice someone withdrawing during a family gathering, or the next time you find yourself wanting to disappear when relatives visit, pause. Don't immediately judge it as rude or strange or ungrateful. Consider instead what might be underneath that withdrawal. What wounds might it be protecting? What needs might it be expressing? What boundaries might it be trying to establish? Because avoiding family gatherings is rarely about not loving the people involved. It's usually about self-protection. It's usually about honoring your own needs. It's usually about the truth that being authentic and well is more important than performing happiness. And maybe that's the real lesson here, that it's okay to not want to socialize when relatives visit, that it's okay to need space, that it's okay to protect your peace, that it's okay to be honest about what you can and can't do. The guilt will ease when you start to honor what you actually need instead of what you think you should want. And eventually you might find that you can be around family in a way that feels more true. Not because you forced yourself, but because you built something different, something real, something that doesn't require you to disappear to survive.